Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. We are Oaks Consultancy, and this morning we're delighted to talk through building resilient fundraising strategies in the COVID-19 landscape. So I hope you've all got a coffee ready, you're comfortable, you've got your best spot on the sofa, maybe a notepad ready, and we're going to kick off and see what we can cover today and hopefully give you some fantastic advice throughout the morning. So if I can, there we go. Just going to obviously run a little bit of housekeeping. No strict rules, of course, but we just want to make sure that everyone is listening appropriately. So checking your audio settings. Hopefully you can hear us. There's a bit of tips and advice about there if you're having trouble with any Wi-Fi or any signals. We will also, we're going to run through the webinar, but we are also really open to all of your questions, which we'll take at the very end. But there's an option there for you to just type in those questions in the little box, and we'll collect them all at the end. Equally as well, if we do run out of time, we can gather all those questions, we can come back to you on a one-to-one basis, and we can even share those questions out with everyone who's attended so you can see what we fed back. And of course, just in case you want to re-watch our smiley faces, there will be a recording sent back to you afterwards and a bit of feedback which we would wish to gain from you, so you'll get that on an email from the team after. Right, let's get really into the webinar. So, if I could have a, there we go. Sometimes the slides lag a little bit. So who are your smiley faces today? Well, I'm Beth Sadler. I'm Senior Corporate Partnerships Consultant at Oaks Consultancy. I've got my colleague Ben Nicholson, who's our Senior Account Manager, and also my colleague Natasha Raj, who's an Account Manager. All of us have been with the organisation for quite a few years. We've got very different experiences from past and present, and we're really thrilled to be representing the wider team here today from the comfort of our own homes, because of course our office is shut at the moment, but we're city centre based and we're in the Jewellery Quarter, and when things are back in normal, we really hope to see you there. We've got some fantastic coffee. Ben's our extraordinaire with the coffee, and he'll be happy to make you one and have a chat at any time. Right, moving on, now you've met us and the wider team. Again, if the slides don't lag a little bit. No, mine are lagging. There we go, thank you. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to cover a little bit just more about who Oaks are, really briefly, but I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our services and the areas that we support. Then we're going to have a look at the fundraising landscape and just see, a bit of a reflection of what's been happening over the past few weeks, how that has impacted income generation for the sector, and really what the future might look like as best as we can guess. Then we're going to look at that importance of why it's so vital to have diverse income streams, the real essence of being resilient, and how we're going to go forward when we come out into the new norm. We're going to share some top tips, and like I said, we're going to have questions at the end. So let's tell you about Oaks. So Oaks are strategy, business development and implementation experts for the sector. We work with socially minded organisations that can be for profit or not for profit, but really we just want to be there to be a helping friend to everybody who wants to raise their game, who's super ambitious and are doing amazing things for the community and lots of individuals out there. So we're here to be your critical friend. We definitely really want to make sure we're challenging your thinking, making you think a little bit differently about your strategy, your business development plans, your income generation, and the way that you're working with your benefactors. We're here to help you, make sure you're maximising all of your potential, and really just make sure that everything's sustained and you've got that long-term vision of growth. And these are our areas that we work in. So we've got a wealth of experience working in the sports sector, sports for development, CCOs and NGBs. We've also, in the past few years, been having a fantastic experience working in the education sector, multi-academy trusts, primary school, secondary school, you name it, we're helping them with their growth and mapping. Third sector, so obviously the wider charity sector, like I said, that could be for international development, homelessness, well, all sorts of services actually. Our client list is quite varied, but we've been out there in the third sector. We've also recently moved into the housing sector, and we're now also offering advice for corporates who really want to strengthen their CSR strategy. And if we just flick on to next slide. Like I say, just a quick overview. They're the areas that we're working with. So lots of information around what we do. So we're looking at procurement, asset utilisation. These are all the areas that we would work through with a client to help them look at their current state of play, the opportunities out there, and like I say, that longer term vision of a sustained income generation plan. So we can cover trusts and foundations, good grant writing, we can help them with maximising their fees and charges, their services. With schools, we're looking at how they're best using their assets in the summer schools. We've got a really great spectrum of opportunities that we like to talk through with clients, and we're pretty confident that we can find you a wealth of new ways to diversify that income. So that's all we're talking about Oaks. We just move on to, do apologise, no, sorry, there's some names from our colleagues, from what the colleagues have been working with. So we've got New Life, we've got Magic Bus, Asta, Core, a real diverse group of clients that we've been working with. Thank you. Right, so I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ben, who's going to talk a little bit about the importance of being resilient.
Sorry, it's me and just having some slight issues getting myself unmuted there. Thank you, Beth, firstly for obviously giving us a bit of context around who we are, and yeah, just to reiterate our thanks to everyone for taking the time out of their busy mornings to join us to talk through this. I'm going to set the scene, a little bit more context around why we thought this would hopefully be and help share some learnings to give people some takeaway messages for the moment. Fundamentally, we wanted to base this on the current context and why we think having a resilient fundraising strategy is important this time. So without lingering too long on this, I'm sure resilience along with unprecedented is probably the most overused word and everything that's going on. But just to set the scene, the reason we talk about resilience is very much the ability to recover quickly from difficulty, to be resilient and to be tough to changes in the landscape. And as a income diversification and income generation agency, we very much look at this through the lens of revenue and financial sustainability. I'm hoping on the next slide there's a little bit more of a visual representation for anyone that's worked with me in the past. They'll know I'm very much a draw thing rather. But the reason we want to talk about having diverse revenue streams is that fundamentally, as an organisation, if you're built on being wholly funded by a single revenue stream, as soon as there's an impact to that source of income, ultimately you're in a very vulnerable position. Will struggle to survive. Those organisations with multiple revenue streams are in a much more fortunate position that if an impact on one of those key revenue streams, albeit a challenge, it doesn't ultimately jeopardise the long-term future of said organisation, and also to continue to impact on the work that continues to do. Like I say, to represent that in a very visual format, I had much fun again putting this slide together. Unfortunately, they're not pictures I've taken, and they are stock images taken off Google. But to consider each of those Jenga blocks as a revenue stream, and a slight reflection back to people here. If you were to remove one or maybe two of your revenue streams, would you carry on standing? Would you be able to rebuild and carry on moving forward, as in the top right, or ultimately would you be in the position that you're facing a really uncertain future and unfortunately the potential to collapse? So very much kind of the context for this. Hopefully the next 20 minutes or so will very much talk you through our top tips and recommendations for very much being the Jenga pile in the top right, as opposed to the Jenga pile at the bottom there. Go on to the next slide. Great, I'm going to hand over to Natasha just to talk you through a little bit more around kind of the current landscape.
Can we move to the next slide, please? So I can imagine you have all been impacted by COVID-19 in very different ways. lockdown conditions have had such an impact within the third sector, and it's all so very different. So the below are just some kind of key things that we're picking up on. Funders at the minute have had a very mixed response. You know, some funders have paused their windows and just think it's best to kind of pick up after COVID has cleared. Some have decided to shift their priorities to align with COVID. So as you'll all be able to see, a lot of the funding landscape, you know, they've all released emergency funding, which is great. There are immediate priorities for bodies awarding funding that is refocused around certain things. So, for example, National Lottery, which usually focuses on kind of community and bringing communities together, have opened up a strand where they're linking in with COVID-19 and how they can help communities face COVID-19. There are various organisations with it generating income that are no longer opening their doors. So a lot of clubs, schools and well, I say schools are now open, but clubs and charities in particular that aren't open anymore, and that's significantly, you know, detrimental to their finance. There are just so many things that are impacting everything. You know, there's so many vulnerable people that were in clubs and all these programs that no longer have any of that. So, you know, the impact of COVID is just, you know, it's hitting everyone very differently. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the key things that we have kind of noticed moving forward in terms to responses from funders, there's a focus on core funding now, whereas before funders didn't particularly focus on core funding. There was a few, you know, that were very specific to that. And now I think we're seeing a lot more throughout the funding landscape that obviously, you know, funders are seeing that for organisations and charities to be able to survive this, they need to be able to fund some core elements of your overheads. And with this obviously brings flexibility, so funders have been really flexible in how they're giving, when they're giving and why they're giving. And that links in really nicely with advance payments. So a lot of you will be able to see within the funding landscape at the minute that, you know, the emergency funding, the turnarounds, you know, a couple of weeks, whereas normally it's a couple of months. A lot more funders are giving unrestricted funding opportunities, which is great to see. Normally funding is very, you know, what you say you're going to do and what you're going to deliver is what you have to spend your money on. But now it's becoming unrestricted, meaning that you can, you know, use the money where you see best within your organisation. And again, there's a lot of funders that are responding directly to COVID activity. So if there's ways that you can change your kind of income to suit COVID, so taking your sessions online, or, you know, if you're a tennis club, for example, installing things around social distancing, markings on the floor and stuff, so you can kind of keep yourselves open, because obviously tennis is one of the sports that's allowed at this moment in time. And I think the great thing that we're seeing across the board is just the great advocacy, the public support for COVID, and the fact that the landscape has reacted very quickly and are, you know, in support of all the things that are happening out there, and they're trying to do their best. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what does this mean for everyone at the minute? So while this is an entirely new operating environment, you know, historically evidence suggests that in times of crisis, trusts and foundations tend to give out more rather than less. So, you know, funding sources such as trusts and foundations are backed significantly by grant makers, regardless of what's happening in the climate, which is great. However, it does mean that at this moment in time, there are a lot of people competing within the funding landscape, and, you know, it's getting harder to get the grants out there. But what's great to see that during this moment in time is that actually a lot of funders are trying to find ways to continue their normal strands, as well as have the COVID strands that are available as well. So I think that's another way that they're not trying to diminish the competition that's happening, but just make it a bit more fair, you know, fair ground, fair play. Next slide, please.
Tash, thank you. It was a really good quick reflection of just where we're at. But obviously now the answers are that we're obviously here for is how do we respond to this? How do we kind of look at where things are and make the most of looking at where the future could be to diversify the incomes? So if we just click onto the next slide quickly, we're just going to cover 3 areas today because we are conscious there's only really 40 minutes left. There's lots we could talk about, but today we're going to deep dive into the opportunities that Oaks have seen within trusts and foundations, the areas of growth and the real innovation that's coming out of corporate partnerships with the charity sector. And then, of course, we would have to touch on digital fundraising because it's been so present over the past couple of weeks and months. If we haven't done a digital quiz, where have you been for the past few weeks? So I'm now going to hand back to Tash because she's going to deep dive a little bit further into some top tips about working with trusts and foundations for your organisation.
Okay, so while we're talking about trusts and foundations, these are the key areas that we're going to cover. So the general process, which a lot of you will be familiar with, so I won't kind of dabble in that too much. But I guess the key areas specifically that we want to make sure that everyone knows about is the need, the outputs, and the outcomes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm sure you're all really familiar, but this is one half of what the process looks like. So eligibility is just, making sure you fit a funder's criteria. So making sure that you are set up in the correct way, that you have board members, you have your financial accounts and all the various different clauses that are relevant to being able to apply. Identifying priorities, again, is key. Sometimes a lot of organisations can find the funder and kind of try and make a project around that particular funder when it's actually a lot better if you find your own objectives, your own area of need based on your target group and take what you have and try and find funders that match what you want to do. And that comes to identifying the funders, which is when you find your funders, keep a record of who it is that you're specifically applying to and make sure that you're making case studies along the way, because a lot of funders, once you apply the one time, you can always apply again, and having that case study of how they've been able to support you in the past is always massively helpful for the next time round. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when it comes to developing your project, you need to remember the who, what, why, when, and where. These are obviously always the key important things to remember. And then when it comes to writing your application, obviously the key things to remember is to always read the guidance. There's always a lot of helpful tips in there around each individual question, specifically based on the need, output, outcomes, and sustainability and your budget. And then after that comes submitting. So obviously make sure that you know when your deadlines are and what needs to be submitted with. And I always try not to submit on the day of the submission, but sometimes it just can't be helped. But try and forward plan and make sure that you give yourself plenty of time to write and plenty of time to potentially give it to someone else to have a look at. And again, print off a physical copy, because I think I always find better to kind of read through everything beforehand. Submission is great on an actual version in front of me. Next slide. So the key 3 areas that we're going to kind of speak about today is evidencing the need, articulating output, and developing outcomes. These 3 sections are always needing to be interlinked. They all very well correlate with each other. Anything that happens within your need and why you need something is automatically articulated within your outputs and what it's going to achieve because it's something that you need to do. And obviously developing your outcomes comes directly off all of these things. Next slide. Thank you. I hope no one has to squint to see that like I do. So evidencing the need is basically saying to yourself, what is the challenge that you're trying to address at the minute? So, who do you work with? Who is your target audience? What are the problems that they are facing? And one of the best ways to articulate this is actually by having that conversation and evidencing that in your application. So, put in the questions that you're having, your questionnaires, your surveys, to obviously really enforce what is being said by your target group, you can back it up with local statistics. And this is a really good way to evidence the fact that the people that you are doing this project for and designing it for, they are helping you design and develop what this will eventually be. And again, the key thing to remember in this is to be confident but realistic. Don't overshoot by saying, you know, there's very large amounts of poverty within your area and you're going to solve it. You're going to help towards it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when articulating your outputs, the questions you want to be asking yourself is, now that you know what your issues are and what your need is, how are you going to be able to help overcome what's happening? So what is it, what activities is it that you want to deliver? Why these particular activities? How are these activities going to be delivered? How is that going to help you overcome what's happening and what the issues are that you're facing? Why is it that you're best placed to do this? So is there a particular project that you've been delivering for a while, so you know that you're best placed suited to do that because you know that you're already hitting that target group? When is it going to start and finish? You know, the frequency of your activities, when they're going to happen, who's going to be involved. These are all the kind of key questions that you want to make sure that you're answering during these outputs. It's very much similar to having a timetable of this is when this is going to happen and this is what you're going to do and this is how it's going to happen. And it's basically to relay to a funder that you've thought about everything moving forward and you've got a very specific kind of timescale that you want to do everything in. Next slide, please. Thank you. So developing your outcomes, the key thing you want to ask yourself here is, what is it that you're trying to achieve from this? So you know your need, you know how you're going to address it, but what is it that you're getting from this? What difference are you trying to make? What challenge are you trying to overcome? So this is really helpful. I think a lot of the time when you speak to your kind of target group, you figure out what their issues are, and part of that conversation is what you can do to help them and what they're going to gain from that. So this again is where your evidencing and going out to your community is really key. And the fact that you're going to change people's lives by doing what you're doing and the activities that you've chosen are specifically based on this, and that the outcomes that you're going to achieve from this are very much linked into that. So it's very much about having a logical link between your needs and outputs and the changes that you're going to measure. And I think the key thing for this in particular, again, is to be realistic. Next slide. So here are a couple of funding opportunities that we are aware of at the minute. So the National Lottery have announced a 200 million fund, which is specifically for COVID-related projects. Oaks in particular have had very good success with this part at the minute. It's a part that anyone can really apply for from any background. I think the only thing that's slightly tricky is with schools, but as long as you have that real community benefit and focus, you still stand a good chance. Independent Age is one that has opened in the last couple of weeks, and it's a 15k pot. And it's really to protect the elderly. And obviously we all know that, mental health is definitely going to be on the rise, but particularly within the elderly. So this pot is specifically to support them. Paul Hamlin, again, have partnered with Comet Relief to release their fund on tech. So obviously everything is now going online. So this is a great way for you to help those who aren't quite online savvy or don't always have, enough financial backing to have their own laptops and devices. And again, Children in Need is a part that they have responded to very swiftly with their COVID support. And it's mainly just to help kind of, vulnerable kids. A lot of kids are going back to homes where, they were kind of better off in school. So this part is to really help make sure that every single child is being looked after during this period of time. And I know you can't click on those links, but I'm sure if you give them all a quick Google, you'll find those exact strands. Next slide, please. Oh, right, sorry, this one's for Ben.
Okay, thank you, Tash. I mean, even as somebody that's obviously working closely in this area, it's good to have kind of a refresher and see the response from funders, particularly within this challenging time for everyone. Moving away from grant funding and onto the second area out of the three, I'm just going to run through a couple of slides around corporate partnerships. So very much away from the traditional trust and foundation landscape and much more into the wider landscape with corporate partners. We're going to talk through how Oaks would classify the different types of partnerships in this space, talk about how you as organisations can identify where your strength areas and how you play upon those, and then touch upon the process of how partnerships are typically delivered and just some top tips around each of those stages. Next slide, please. I think when we talk about partnerships, it's definitely an area that we probably as a sector, we bounce around a lot and don't ever really take the time to kind of define that into some really tangible work areas. So for simplicity, the way we would view this is we would break them down into 4 key partnership types of charitable, value in kind and advertising. And the reason we would do this is to really start to segment up the offer, both from what as an organisation could be offered and the support that a corporate could give and the benefit they may receive in return. I think the key thing around partnerships is very much a mutually kind of beneficial and collaborative arrangement as opposed to being very transactional. So in terms of how we would refer to commercial partnerships, these are your more traditional sponsorship arrangements, financial transactions. Those are that are a little bit more kind of commercially minded in terms of a financial contribution in return for visibility and awareness or branding and exposure. Charitable partnerships there's some fantastic of those out in the sector, some fantastic corporate companies which are doing great work here, but we would look at these very much as kind of your charity of the year partnerships. Those partnerships that in return for a company being able to kind of demonstrate their corporate social responsibility credentials or make kind of genuine impacts on the community in return for things like employee fundraising, donations, gift of services and support. Value in kind partnerships, which again I'm sure many people are accessing. This is away from the financial transactions and more in terms of gift of equipment, gift of services, pro bono services, outside of you know the kind of the core rhythm of an organisation, but things that are fundamentally vital to organisations delivering, whether that's kind of service based or whether that's the wider business benefit. And then the last area in terms of advertising, which arguably is an area which I think, particularly kind of across the third sector, education and a wider sport for development sake, is overlooked on the whole as a tangible opportunity. But understanding how a company could gain visibility, awareness within the marketplace that you have, whether that's your beneficiaries, whether that's through your networks, in return for some sort of financial contribution, whether that's paying to be part of your newsletter, be featured on your website, whether there's affiliate marketing opportunities that you set up from there. Next slide, please. There we go. So bringing that more kind of into the strength areas, the typical process to go through, and I know there's some current clients, and of course some of which we've gone through this process with, but really breaking this down into where your strength areas are, and really starting to get under the skin that as an organisation, regardless of the sector you operate in, regardless of your service offer, regardless if you're very much set up directly for beneficiaries or if you're an umbrella organisation, you'll have different strength areas. This could be very much you have a fantastic digital presence and you've got a member base of 50,000 people that you compliant wise that you can contact and you can directly advertise to. It could be that you're a fantastic brand and holding an affiliation with you or an association with you actually brings a huge amount of benefit to a corporate organisation. You might be delivering fantastic work within a community, huge amount of impact, and therefore actually you and being associated with you is a great demonstration of their CSR credentials themselves. It could be you have a fantastic amount of data and actually there's an opportunity to work with people to commercialise your data. You could have a superb network of other companies with that, so you could be offering introductions to other businesses, to other organisations, and moving forward, that's something that you could explore to help create partnerships which are beneficial to both sides. So there's a market opportunity for a corporate organisation, can also benefit financially out of that, finder's fees, commissions, referrals, and similar. And it could be that you have a fantastic events program or traditional kind of sponsorship route or around your events is the way to go. So not one for us to necessarily linger on, but hopefully one for food for thought for you, that you can start to break your area under these headers and understand where you're particularly strong, and if that's an area you can focus on and start to look for partners in. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so just to, I guess, kind of talk through how those partnerships are traditionally developed, and it would be lovely if it was quite as linear as this. Unfortunately, it's never quite as smooth a process as this, but for the purposes of today and demonstrating how that looks, the starting point that we would always very much recommend is to understand precisely what it is that you can offer. So what is your, without being too kind of commercially minded here, what is your saleable inventory? What are the areas that you can take out to market of interest to a potential partner? That could be some of your programs, that could be some of your events, it could be that you've got a particularly strong digital proposition and therefore actually an advertising route might be very useful for you. Where do you sit within a market place? So to pick on an example, for schools, if on face value within education, you were to look at a multi-academy trust, you would, there's 30,000 pupils, there's 10,000 teachers, there's an additional 5,000 support staff. How does that begin to look kind of within a marketplace that actually you hold access to 60,000 families and 20,000 adults, all with their own buying habits? So how do you look within the market? But then what's the wider marketplace that you sit in? How does that look in terms of the value that you could offer to a corporate partner? I think there's definitely probably a hangover from years gone by, where it's very much about take within kind of a partnership sphere, and what can we get from a partner, and without necessarily looking at actually what can be offered back to a partner. Again, that could be the opportunity for them to demonstrate their CSR credentials, it could be awareness, but to be able to talk to them and the benefit that they could be partnered with you is absolutely a fundamental part of negotiating this process. Defining your narrative and your message. So how do you talk about yourself as an organisation? How do you, in the classic 30-second elevator pitch, demonstrate that you are the best organisation to partner with? You demonstrate that you have fantastic impacts within your sector, but also you have a lot to benefit back to a partner. And I think this is, fundamentally the area that will set you apart. There's a lot of organisations looking for partners, and it's, again, without using my second cliche of the slides, it's first impressions count, and there's a lot of competition, so you have to have a really, really compelling message and narrative to open the door and to get people to pay attention to you. And then the last few areas, very much understanding your market, of who you could go and approach, what kind of competition you're potentially up against, really developing that pitch and kind of to open up those doors. And then the last part, they look very simple on the slide here, but approaching and negotiating and activating a partnership. So it doesn't end once the deal is signed. There's a lot of ongoing work, and fundamentally the organisations that do well within partnerships are those that retain partners year to year. It's cheaper to retain a partner and to be famous to partner with, absolutely deliver on that partnership, then year on year going out and finding new partners completely from scratch. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. So I'm going to cover digital fundraising, and just to really define that space, because we've seen it really change over the past few years. At its core, it was fundraising online, but now we are seeing it massively through mobile technology, social media, and there's just so many different platforms now that has made digital fundraising so much more easier for the sector. So I'm going to run through all of those different types that have come to light, bring you some examples, and just talk through how you might wish to develop a digital fundraising campaign. So if we look up the next slide, wonderful. So there's quite a few different types of digital fundraising out there for the sector now, which I'm very pleased to say. And as we've done before, we're going to categorise all of these up and just give you a quick whistle stop tour through them. So crowdfunding, you're probably quite aware of this. This is where individuals are really encouraged to make a small donation to fund something at a fairly low risk because they're pledging for something to go ahead. So we've seen that with startup businesses, or we've seen that with individual campaigns behind a cause, and there's some really great platforms out there, but obviously crowdfunding is the most famously known one. Click to give. So this is where organisations are trying to get individuals to donate through shopping platforms, really. So I'm talking about things like Amazon Smile and eBay, where individuals can click through to a different route, go through to something like Amazon Smile, do their usual shopping as they wish through Amazon, but through it they're making a contribution to their chosen charity or charities, it could be more than one, through the platform. There's also online charity auctions, breaking down those barriers of physical space no longer needed. Now you're talking about lots that people can internationally, any time zone, through any currency, bid on. And they can be given notifications through text or online that they've been outbidded, or that they might wish to also look at other lots. So this is a really great space for going global, getting some noise, getting those prices up, and kind of really creating a virtual community far bigger than just a room in an auction house would have ever done for you, or an event would have ever done. Social media, wow, that's something that's really taking over this space at the moment. Social media offers you to engage with individuals, obviously, around a campaign, but equally make activities such as online events and donations very simple. So I'm talking about things like Facebook streaming, where you could stream quizzes, challenges, you can stream question and panel type events. And throughout it, you're encouraging your watchers, your audience to donate. You'll get notifications from those who are also watching the stream that donations have been made. So why not also make a donation? You can live talk. Facebook is also doing things like donations through people's birthdays. So rather than just say happy birthday to me on Facebook, why not donate to cancer research, because I really care about that this year. And we're even hearing on the grapevine that Facebook is going to be opening up shopping platforms, and that's going to transcend into WhatsApp. So that's also a retail space that charity sector could think about, how they can utilise that new platform that's going to come through social media of sending their commerce through WhatsApp and Facebook and gaining donations that way. And it must also be recognised that TikTok and Instagram, so there's other social media platforms out there that are doing fantastic services to the sector to engage with a younger, wider global audience. Donation platforms, again, you're probably quite comfortable with this space. That's going to be things such as your Just Giving, your Virgin Giving, these type of very simple to use websites where you can list a cause, you can talk about a project. It's very easy to use. People can log on, leave a few details, use their card, make a pledge donation as to why they've donated to that cause if they wish to. They support you with gift aid. They're very commonly known. So even though they might be slightly old news, they're definitely one that's a fantastic use to the sector and always have been. Viral campaigns, by no means easy. They go viral for a reason. They're normally very organic, very trendy, very innovative, but they happen. We've seen them things such as the Ice Bucket Challenge. We've seen them with people streaming their running competitions that they've been doing. So there's plenty of things out there that can go viral. Some of the bigger charities really do fantastic in this space. But the purpose really behind that is how your organisation can get behind or launch a campaign. It's usually hashtagged, and it just wants to be shared because people love it. People really get behind it. People post a picture, people post like I say, their Strava stats. People want to play with it with their friends, whatever it might be. The ice bucket, we couldn't have got any better good at thinking about putting a bucket of ice over your mum or dad's head, and that's why it went viral. But it equally raised a lot of money for the sector. Text donations, again, it's been around a very long time, but not one to be forgotten. There's sites out there such as Donor where you can register yourself. You'll get given a very small code. It's normally something like 70095 and text project global change, something like that, where your users can make a very easy donation through the text service of £5, £10, whatever it is that you wish to recommend, via their bill. Super easy on their sofa. They haven't even had to get up to the computer, but a really great way to engage with a wider audience and say, look how easy we are. So just drop us a text and you've made us a donation. We've seen really great things with things like Celebrity Bake Off using such resources. And as well, really been a market emerger over the past few years it's been contactless. So I've been to many events where there's raffle tickets going round, or they're asking for donations on top of it being obviously a fantastic event. You've got these great people walking around with contactless machines, just basically saying, tap your card, we'll email you a receipt for the transaction. No longer are you dealing with, oh, I haven't got the change, oh, I didn't go to the cash machine, I was just going to use my card. You know, such a great call to action to be able to say to people, but look, we've got the contactless through. These are really developing as well. We've seen them in shopping centres. We've now got digital HD screens that are bringing kind of pictures and more interaction towards the cause. So you almost even lose the person factor if you want to, because you can have technology hired, loaned, own it if you wish to, just for an event or for much longer. And we would probably recommend someone such as Goodbox, who are really on top of that area. If we just click on to the next slide, I just wanted to pull out some examples that we've seen in, I guess, this digital fundraising, which is individual giving meets events, meets COVID-19, and how we respond to how do we fundraise when we can't do a virtual event that we planned because of lockdown. And these are some great examples over the past few weeks. So starting over there in the corner, Miles for Mind. Obviously, we've had lots of running competitions cancelled, which has been really disappointing for the sector. We know that we raised a lot of money through these year upon year. Mind responded thinking, well, what can we do throughout the month of May? People are wishing to use their time to get out of lockdown, have a breath of fresh air, keep up their fitness, but they can't go and take part in the competition. So Miles for Mind was all throughout May. It's heavily around Mental Health Awareness Week as well. The view being run 25 miles throughout May. They asked participants to submit a £13.95 donation towards taking part. That also meant that if they completed the challenge, they would get posted a medal at the very end. The way to do it was to use your Fitbit, use your Strava account, whatever it was that you were logged onto, record your miles and then submit them to the charity. And obviously you were raising lots of money throughout the month for doing it. We also saw Maricure online auction, who raised an incredible £48,000. They used the platform Givergy. They were very lucky to have some famous advocates who really promoted the auction and the lots through their own social media and really spread the word on their behalf. But I think that level of income that they raised just really went to show how taking something out of a physical space, responding to lockdown really quickly and say, what can we do virtually is going to attract a global audience. And it worked. It worked, and they got really fantastic prizes, lots, and really fantastic uptake. At the bottom there, we have Level Up for Shelter. a really interesting one that was delivered through the site Give a Penny. Level Up for Shelter concept was anyone of any age, whether you were gaming virtually, so you're gaming online, or if you were just sitting around a board game with your family and friends, let's look at it as a fundraiser. So sponsor me as an individual to complete a game in a certain amount of time, or get to the highest level that I've ever got to, earn the most points that I've ever earned in my game. Sponsor me and I will donate it to shelter. And it kind of it really embodied people being a superhero, and how we're all just kind of making the most of this lockdown time to have fun with family and friends virtually, but equally making this huge difference to shelter. And I would highly recommend Give a Penny as well. They've got some really innovative techniques for using platforms such as Spotify and Strava for fundraising campaigns. And then finally at the bottom, I also wanted to signpost the charity Love Brum, who throughout their campaign One Brum during COVID-19 have now raised over £20,000. They've run a few quizzes, which they've marketed through Facebook, they've streamed through Facebook, and they've also had some of their volunteers and trustees do things like 12-hour treadmill walks, which they've streamed through Facebook. They've run DJ nights through Facebook. They've just really got behind that community. They know that they've got a fairly young supporter base. They thought about their audience, they thought about what their audience would like to engage with. They really heavily promoted it through social media. They put a great hashtag behind it. They've got people to share, talk about it, stream, and say £20,000 is an incredible amount, pretty much all done through social media. So they've been really successful there. We just have a look at the next slide. Wonderful. So how can we develop a digital campaign? Now, one thing to remember is this is not going to go away. The past few weeks have really elevated the space of what people have responded to, delivered, learned from. And I think it needs to be now taken that going forward, if you haven't got a digital events fundraising campaign alongside of physical events, you're going to be missing some space. And two reasons: obviously it's going to bring you income, but it's also going to really raise your profile and gain you new supporters and new followers. So when we're thinking about developing, right, I want to do a fundraising campaign online, where do I even start? Well, I think kind of hand in hand is thinking about that communications plan. So sitting down with your team and thinking, what do we want to do? How are we going to share it? What are the key milestones and the key opportunities for promoting it? We need to think about, well, how do we launch it? How do we make a midway point to share, when it's happening, how much has been raised, celebrating those that have become involved? When are we going to put it to an end? How are we going to celebrate the success that was made? And really get that kind of community engagement. Who are our ambassadors and advocates and partners in the area? And as Ben was saying, our corporate partners who can be really behind it. Being digital, it can go global and it can potentially go viral. What can we do that's a bit different? What can we do that's new? And it is really hard to think of something new. Like I said, we're all a little bit quizzed out. There's been a lot of it out there, so I'm not saying this is an easy challenge. But especially during lockdown, it's been really I guess actually digital fundraising has filled a space around that social interaction. It's brought friends and families and colleagues together behind a challenge, behind a quiz, to do something together for a good cause at the same time. And that's not going to go away. We've really embraced this virtual socializing. And I think many of us are going to take it forward, but think about what you could do a little bit differently. How are you talking to your supporters around this campaign? So it's really important to be communicating the cause, the need, the emotion. Think about how your audience feel. Think about those key trigger words. Why would they want to take part? Why do they care? Talk to past donors and past supporters. Find out why they've supported. What would they like to do? What would they like to hear? Keep it really personal. It's really great to tell your story from a benefactor and talk as a one-to-one. Talk to your supporter from someone who's gained from the experience of your resources and your services. And just really, like I say, make sure that you're keeping it emotional, you're keeping it authentic, and you're keeping it consistent. So you're really telling that story, and we're really good at keeping facts and data and figures, but is that the emotional side? Talk about your volunteers, talk about the way people have adapted, talk about what people have learned, talk about you know, new supporters. Just keep the story alive. It doesn't have to just be the same facts that people digest. People will digest a quote really to the core of their heart and remember something that you've said as an impact rather than necessarily numbers that just get a little bit lost. So when we're thinking about the platforms, as I said before, with digital fundraising, let's make it really easy. There's so many platforms, sites out there such as Just Giving, where people have already got login details, don't have super long forms. We don't need to capture all of their backstory, what their mother's maiden name is. It doesn't need to happen. We basically just want to know if they want to tell us who they are, how much they would like to donate, and hopefully the reasoning behind they would like to donate. Let's make it quick, let's make it simple, and let's get them engaged. And let's make sure it's mobile enabled as well. It'd be really important to make sure that your platforms and your website translate to the mobile device, because that's probably they're going to be watching streams, probably how they're going to be engaging with the campaign. They're going to be flicking through and donating. What does a donation buy is really interesting as well. Oh, thank you. What does a donation buy? It's great to have that impact piece. So if you donate £10, it will buy, such as Tash was saying, 10 textbooks in the school. If you give us £20, it will buy 30 meals for a small community out in India. And then equally, people like to sort of know the other side. Think about the behavioural economics here. So if I was to buy a Costa coffee next week, and the donor, and I've spent £5, what alternatively could that £5 that really I probably don't need be sacrificed and mean more to your charity? There's some really great stuff around in the media and lots of articles around behavioural economics and talking around nudge theory and how we frame and architect the ask. It's worth having a Google and looking into some of that. There's some Marie Curie is doing some really great stuff. So, for example, fixed donation amounts. And I'm talking about behavioural economics. Marie Curie do lots of options. So they'll say you could donate £120, you could donate £90, or you could donate £30. £120 would be very bold. It'd be ticked, ready to go for them to click on and donate. People probably might think that's a little bit much and maybe go for the middle option, feeling that that's a more comfortable ask. But I'm not being the type of person that's only giving you £30. They're perfectly happy if you're only giving them £90. That's really great engagement. So have a little bit think about how are you displaying those donation amounts? How are you making it really clear, really simple, and nudging people to think, actually, yeah, I'm okay to part with £50 behind this campaign. And of course, you really create a community. So where I was talking about those social media avenues, think about a mini brand behind this campaign, think about the colour, think about the images, think about how you're tagging people in, asking them to share videos, integrate with your social media community, reply back to them, give a name behind the person in your volunteer team or your media team that is saying thank you. Just make sure people feel loved, people feel part of this journey, people feel that there's a longer term plan and people are getting updates from you. So will they subscribe to your newsletter and things like that? And of course, say thank you, thank you, thank you. There's some really good techniques such as recording when people became a donor, became a supporter, and say thank you for your first anniversary of being part of our organisation. Or like I've just said, thank you on social media, quick personal email. Whatever way that you think that you can do it, I think we just need to keep on saying thank you, because obviously we're always really appreciative of their donations. And thank you. So let's click on to the next. We're obviously going to do a really quick summary. And I'm going to hand over to Tash.
I think I'm going to jump in at this point, just because I know I'm muted. Beth, thank you for that. That was, again, really enlightening to see from there. So just going to have a kind of a real headline summary. I'm conscious of everyone's time. We've got a couple of questions which have come in. Can we have the next slide just to show that summary? So fundamentally, overarching tip is make sure you have streams. If you are wholly reliant on a single revenue stream, you're incredibly vulnerable, and unfortunately in times of crisis such as we're in at the moment, that's a vulnerable position to be in. A trusting foundation, top tips would be evidence and need, articulate your outputs and make sure you're developing your outcomes and clearly following that thread all the way through. Corporate partnerships, understand your strength areas and use those to define your inventory. understand what your narrative and your message and how you're talking about yourself and the opportunities to partners, and then when you approach and negotiate, just ensure that you're demonstrating your value proposition to a partner as much as understanding the support that they can give to you. And then digital fundraising, which I think now more so than ever is incredibly pertinent. Make sure you're telling the story of what you're fundraising for, and what those donations will buy. Make it as easy as possible for people, so let's try and remove any sort of friction and create any sort of barriers. And then the last part of it, you know, we're seeing some fantastic representations of community at the moment. So just because we're all very much remote and based out of our living rooms at the moment, there's no reason for that community element to not exist. So create a digital community to help with that fundraising. And the next slide, please. I think the last thing, just there's a couple of resources that we'd like to direct you to. Hopefully they'll be of interest to everyone on this call. But firstly, our newsletter, we share as many good news stories as possible, which I think is something that everybody needs to see at the moment, both around the opportunities which are currently available. It's a great source of information, some success stories that we're seeing out in the wider sector, and then some specific clients as well, and the fantastic social impacts that they have in and amongst their communities. So there's a link just at the bottom there. It's fairly easy to find our newsletter. And at the moment, we're also doing a COVID-19 roundup every couple of weeks, which again, is a fantastic resource just to kind of read through. And just to put Beth on the spot, I'm going to say a massive thank you to Beth for putting all of those together, because she puts a lot of work into those. I think at that point, we've got a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. Is that right?
Yes, of course. So first question, we're just going to quickly pick up one, is, I think this is for Tash, if she's off mute. So Tash, we've been asked, from Oak's perspective, where have you seen the most success over the past few weeks with securing this kind of COVID-19 emergency funding? If you could just give us a couple of examples, where and how?
Yeah, of course. I think well, it's funny that I've been asked this particular question, because the success lies with one of my particular clients. We, across the board in the organisation, have been very successful within the COVID funding. I think specifically across the third sector, so a lot of charities. One of my clients in particular is the Lawn Tennis Association, and I work on their programme that they've launched called Serves, which is taking tennis into disadvantaged communities. So this means that part of that is a whole bunch of various different organisations that are set up as either charities, clubs or CICs for basically delivering this programme, and they have been very successful in achieving receiving the emergency COVID funding. I think since February we've raised about 80k, about between 70 and 80k for them, and I think it's just particularly because they're dealing with the most vulnerable, the most deprived, the most at need children, and it's that sector that they're already working in, and they're delivering things such as food banks, doing shopping for people that are shielded and things like that. So I think it's really key when you're looking at the emergency funding to make sure that you're looking at the exact criteria that they're asking and making sure that you can actually deliver that. And with the service programme, we've just been really lucky that it's the branch of things that they already deliver. So hopefully that answers your question, Beth.
Thank you. And really quickly, Ben, in one sentence, what do you think of the future of corporates and actually engaging with CSR partnerships when they're obviously going to have their own financial worries going forward?
Yeah, I think at the moment, from what we're seeing, and we ran a survey recently to get some more feedback, it's still very positive. Corporate organisations understand they have a responsibility to help out the wider kind of third sector, sort of development sector and so on, and therefore are very responsive and very willing to engage. The caveat is that support may not always be financially clear and concise with the ask that you're asking of those, where the benefit could be something the most, and that could be professional services, it could be value in clients, keeping that at the forefront of the mind when you're making an ask during turbulent times is of critical importance. Yeah, overarchingly, we're seeing a lot of organisations kind of step up to the plate and support.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we'll just click on to the next slide. We'll drop our email addresses in. Like I say, you'll be hearing from us from a final email just for a bit of feedback, and we'll have all of this recording available for you. So do drop us a line if you've got any specific emails. We're here for you and we're happy to help. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. We're so thrilled that you spent the morning with us. And yeah, we look forward to welcoming you back again soon. So thanks, Ben, thanks, Natasha, and thanks, Jen in the background that's helped us with all of the technology. See you all soon.